Welcome to another episode of GraphQL Radio. Today we're continuing our Building in Public series. I'm joined by 4 of my colleagues from Stellate to take you on the journey of how our latest CHR 5 release came to be. This was a really fun process, and the experience really gets to the essence of why people like to work at early stage startups. This team working on CHR 5 had such a dramatic impact on the product in such a short amount of time. It's really been amazing to see. Before we begin, let's start with a round of introductions. Victor, you've been the project lead of CHR 5, so perhaps you can start us off.
Yeah, sure. So, hey everyone, I'm Victor. I'm from Venezuela, but I'm living in Mexico, in Guadalajara specifically. I'm a front-end engineer at Stellate. I'm the project lead for this project.
How about you, Camille? You were also part of the project very early on. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Camille. I'm product designer, the only product designer at Stellate, originally and currently still in Poland. And yeah, I spent most of my past life in other SaaS B2B startups.
How about you, Bogdan?
Yeah. Hey, I'm Bogdan, a front-end engineer at Stellate, based in Bucharest, Romania, and previously a Dreamweaver ninja.
Very nice. Over to you, Alex.
Hey, I'm Alex. I'm product manager. I joined the project very late. I get to see it all getting over the finish line, which is very excited.
Very nice. And I believe you're in Austria.
I am in Austria, yeah.
And,
as you might be able to hear from my accent. And I'm not Arnold. No. I'm Alex, just to reconfirm.
Nice. I'm Andreas Heiberg. I'm from Denmark, and I'm currently sitting in Denmark, and I'm the engineering manager at Stellate. So I was in some way part of this, but not in a large part. Just wonderful to see the team make this happen. All right, so the origins of CHR 5. It's a wonderful name. Victor, you were kind of there from the get-go. Do you want to tell us a bit about how it all came to be?
Yeah. We actually wrote a blog post about this recently, and it's a similar story, right? Like, we were in Mexico City for an engineering offsite, roughly 3 months ago now. We were just sitting down in the living room of a large Airbnb, just talking about caching, right? How our customers are using caching, the cache hit rate they have. And, we were thinking, how do we make customers more successful, right? Maybe some customers have a cache hit rate of 99% or 80%. They're already very successful, right? Because they are preventing 80% of their traffic to go through their backend. Now, how do we make customers that have 20% or 30% cache hit rate more successful? How do we help them increase their cache hit rate? And we went through the dashboard, and we realized we were not offering enough information to provide people with the insights they need to actually improve their cache hit rate. And if you think about it, Stellate is kind of it's a proxy. So we actually know most of the traffic that ends up going to our customer services. So we can actually do some smart stuff and analyze traffic and, see traffic patterns and all of that. So that's what we did. We sat down, we started to map out potential ideas that we can do. At some point, someone came with the name, with the internal project name, which is CHR 5, which is a great name. I love it. At some point, also, Camille, you said to me, this is not CHR 5, this is CHR 30. And I would agree, yeah. Explaining cache to a 5-year-old will be very complicated, especially GraphQL caching. But yeah, that's how it all started. And since that moment, we started ideating, working closely with product and engineering, seeing what was possible, what's not. We did a few possible spikes. I think the most impactful thing at the beginning was playing out with the metrics, because we wanted to offer new metrics. How do we show people, okay, so this is your current cache hit rate, and this is how far can you go. And we came up with a new metric called maximum cache hit rate, which is essentially taking all of your traffic patterns into account and telling you, based on your traffic patterns, this is the maximum percentage that you can get. Because in the real world, it's impossible. In most scenarios, it's impossible to get to 100% cache hit rate. Because you have if you have a GraphQL query, you have things like inputs, and in a real world API, you also have authentication, right? So you don't want to have a cache leak. You don't want to be showing the same cache data to user A and user B, because they might have different things behind authentication that are critical that, if you're showing them, that's a security issue. Essentially, we sat down, we did all the math, and then we came up with this maximum cache hit rate definition that will give you a number below 100% in most scenarios. That is a realistic percentage that will tell you how far can you go.
Nice. Thank you, Victor. It's really cool, Victor. Thank you for that overview. One of the things I found really fun was you and Michael. You were just kind of spitballing, because we were sitting with the CEO, and the CEO was like, you know what I want? I want to be able to tell people what their maximum potential cache hit rate is. And we're like, that is impossible. I don't know how we're going to do that. That doesn't seem likely. But then somehow, at the end of the day, you released that into production. Or at least something that led us down that path. Tell me something about that.
Yeah, that was funny because, and you mentioned the beginning of the project, and that was some interesting times because the beginning was like, yeah, let's make caching better. And that's really vague, right? Like, what does that mean? Like, we didn't have a clear goal at the beginning. We didn't know what we wanted to do. It was also like a lot of product work into like defining what we wanted to do, talking with users, exploring opportunities, doing a lot of product and design work at the beginning. And yeah, that was a fun day when we shipped the Max CHR because it exactly started like that. Like, we were like, how the hell are we going to calculate this metric? How do we actually do it? How do we make it happen? It sounds impossible, right? But yeah, somehow we came up with a SQL query in a day and shipped it to production. That was startup life. Yeah, pretty much.
That's awesome. One of the things I remember early on was Camille was doing all these design iterations. I guess for context, early on we were exploring things and we realized actually there are some services out there that while we have a GraphQL proxy, they put a lot of non-GraphQL traffic through it, right? And so we were kind of like, well, this is a bit frustrating. We want to filter that out so we could just focus on the GraphQL metrics. And so we came up with this non-cacheable concept. And I remember Camille just spitting through hundreds of iterations. Camille, how do you remember that experience?
Like a blur now, like so many of those that I went through. It's not only the fact of non-cacheable, but we also had a lot of fun trying to come up with an idea for the max cache hit rate, because we went through theoretical max cache hit rate, cacheable request, cacheable traffic, non-cacheable traffic, overall cache hit rate. Like there was so many of them, but eventually we landed on something that resonated so well with like the max cache hit rate. That's like pretty simple to explain, pretty simple to play with the acronym of cache hit rate. But yeah, there was also a lot of fun with trying to come up how to break down the requests, especially with services that were such a big surprise that you could see an order of 2 million per day requests that are non-GraphQL passing through the Stellate, which is a GraphQL service, as a GraphQL product. And yeah, that was kind of mind-boggling because in some cases it could be 80% of the traffic that you're sending to a GraphQL caching product that is not a GraphQL query, which was kind of odd thing to deal with. You don't expect that. That was a surprise, I think, for everyone. But yeah, we eventually managed to find a way that makes sense. And we also make it clear that you are actually sending us a lot of stuff that you probably shouldn't be sending us. And we also had a lot of fun with identifying what actually was supposed to be counted as cacheable or not.
Yeah, it's, I guess, hard to remember all these things, like in retrospect. I just recall looking at the Figma and being impressed by like the tens of different iterations of like, oh, here's what was a cache hit, here is what was a cache miss. And then there was these other categories that we came up with, like various different ways of breaking that down and thinking about it. Also UI iterations on how we should display that, allow people to toggle in and so on. It's a very fascinating experience to see you kind of work through all that.
Something interesting there is that, in this project where we were doing things like kind of for the first time in the industry, right? Because GraphQL caching is kind of like a new concept, like GraphQL is not that old, right? And now GraphQL edge caching, it's also a newer concept as well, right? We are one of the first companies trying to do this and figuring things out. So we were actually doing first for the first time and trying to figure things out, like, getting deep into the weeds and like figuring out, okay, what's the right name for this? What's the right name for this? How do we call this thing? Because these are like new concepts that we're introducing. So we actually got into this conversation multiple times during the project. And it was one of the most difficult challenges, right? Like dealing with new concepts, creating new things out of nowhere and trying to put the right name to things to make it easier to explain to our users.
Yeah, I also remember you, Victor, you started implementing it and you're just like, nope, this does not work. It seemed great on paper, but it does not work. What was that about?
Yeah, like I think that happened specifically with the cacheable versus non-cacheable data. Essentially, we were trying to split our data into like what can be cached and what cannot be cached. And this is really important when you're talking about caching opportunities and max cache hit rate. Because as Camille said, if we get a request that is a non-GraphQL request, that's a non-cacheable request because we are a GraphQL caching service, so we only want to cache GraphQL traffic. So actually making that definition and making that split, like for example, mutations are never going to be cached because they are like operating on data, so it doesn't make sense to cache those. Errors are actually also never cached. So there's like a few other definition things that go into this definition, but essentially it was about like we were implementing this view with cacheable versus non-cacheable data, and we quickly realized it didn't make sense. So we went back to the table, ideation, and Camille did a lot of work here. Like Camille actually put a lot of work ideating a lot of variations and came up with one that we actually ended up using, and it's live now.
That's awesome. And Bogdan, you were a late joiner to this project, but you did one of the most amazing contributions, which is hard to imagine didn't exist before we started this project. We are a GraphQL caching product that has a metrics product, and that metrics product did not have anything specific about caching. And as part of this project, you helped create the caching dashboard, which gives you a lot of information. How's it been working on this project?
Yeah, I mean, even though I joined pretty late, I think I've been well integrated in the team. Everyone was really welcoming. And yeah, tackling the caching page, like you mentioned, it's mind-boggling that we didn't have that before. And it brings such a great value to our users. Yeah, seeing the charts over time, how your cache hit rate evolves over time. Also seeing the caching improvement opportunities. We have this cool table below the chart where you can see basically the most important operations that you can cache. You also see the impact. I think Victor mentioned this, but one thing that he had a great idea working on was this impact, where it basically says, hey, you have this operation, and if you max it out to the max cache hit rate, it will improve the overall cache hit rate with this amount. And I think it's such a great indicator to have. We also, in that page, we also have the uncached bandwidth, which is really important for bigger customers to see how much of the traffic we save them in resources and cost.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, as you said, it's hard to imagine not having it now that we have it. But when we started off in this project, it wasn't even on the list of possible solutions, which I find so wonderful. Sometimes you just got to start, just iterate, learn while you go, and then you end up in a beautiful place. You kind of touched on the bandwidth charts, right? I think that was one of those funny user interactions where we're asking for feedback on one of the releases, and then that came up as a response. Do either of you guys remember what I'm referring to?
I mean, I remember one of our users being really happy about that, and we were like, what? Because essentially, like on the caching page, we have the cache hit rate over time chart, and then we have the uncached bandwidth chart, which shows you how much of your traffic is actually being cached, of your traffic bandwidth is being cached versus what's not. And then we were showing a few of our customers the designs for this and early concepts and getting feedback. And we didn't expect that much from the uncached bandwidth because we thought the main focus was the cache rate over time. And then one of our customers was like, okay, this is great, sure, but the uncached bandwidth, that's amazing. I didn't know I wanted that, and now I want it. And that was an amazing reaction.
Yeah, it's really fun. I guess that shows the value of talking to customers early and often, right? Were there any kind of fun interactions with customers during this project? I feel like this is one of the projects where we had the most customer input.
Yeah, I think Alex also might have a good idea on that. He was talking a lot with customers to do a lot of product work here. So
basically, as we were rolling the features or the different features out, like we did a very iterative approach of rolling things out. And as we were doing that, we were informing customers about the changes. And it was great to see either we do this we have some Slack channels with customers where we have really high bandwidth conversations with them. And it's great to use these to we talk about a new rollout, a new feature, and then get back okay, this is how I used it, this is how it helped me. Now I understand how this works. It immediately helped me seeing this operation can be improved, and they brought that operation to the team to discuss okay, how might we be able to do that? And it's great to see basically that all that work that you did at one point you give it to customers and they can do something with it, right? The intent behind it came true, and we were able to give them the tools and give them the visibility to take that what we show them and go back to the teams and then say yes, how can we improve this? How can we get this in the cache hit of this operation increased so that overall we cache more traffic, we can save on more cost. And I think that's just very gratifying to see and be able to actually help customers and get that feedback back. Always fun and good to hear. Yeah,
that's really cool. I guess this is also the first project that I have worked on. At least at Stellate, which doesn't say much. It's only been 6 or 7 months. But it's my first project at Stellate where we had people tweet and LinkedIn or post on LinkedIn about stuff, right? Which I thought was really awesome to see. Not only are they in private this is really cool, but they took it to the next level and actually told other people about it without being prompted. I think that was a really cool moment for me. How did that feel to you guys doing the actual work?
It felt great and a lot of validation, to be honest. When we first started working on this project, there was a lot of it wasn't clear what we wanted to do. There was a lot of opportunities. I remember at the beginning, team or CTO showed us this opportunity solution tree. We had a lot of product ideas and feedback, and it was huge. A lot of little cards in in a mirror dashboard. So we were okay, what do we actually do, right? And then from that moment until now, where customers are actually praising our work and giving us feedback, it feels great. Like we actually, I think we chose at least some of the right things to work on or focus on, because at a startup, that's one of the hardest things. Like, how do you choose the right thing to work on? Because you can spend 3 months working on something and at the end, it doesn't work. Nobody uses it. You just wasted 3 times, or maybe not wasted, but you learned something and you have to iterate and go to the next thing. So yeah, it felt great that, we were getting actually some feedback and positive feedback and people were happy about it. So yeah, it was a great feeling at the end.
For me, go ahead, Kemal. Go ahead.
I was going to say, no question, great feeling, but I didn't want to connect the dots with what Victor said about the early days, because the early days were quite funny for me. I remember I wasn't part of the first kickoff calls, and I just listened to them afterwards. And it was so I came out of listening to those calls with 6 or 7 tickets, just design tickets, which included basically okay, we're just gonna have to redesign everything because everything is broken. This doesn't have the errors are not presented in the right way. There's no caching the information about the operations, and we don't know what the rules are really doing here. So yeah, the early days were quite fluid, to put it this way. Quite fluid, but it was a good feeling that we managed to, from this fluidity, random ideas, so many different opportunities on the table, we managed to come out of the project with so many improvements to the platform as a whole. That felt great. Even if this wouldn't be shared publicly, it would still feel like tremendously great effort on our side.
Yeah, those early days were the most difficult parts of this project. It was quite an ambitious task, help customers cache better, but it's so vague, right? And this opportunity tree that we had, I think perhaps it's hard to imagine what that looks like, listening in, not knowing the internals. But there were 50 maybe solutions in that space. There was a lot of different things that we could do. And how do you triage that? How do you think about what's the most important? And funny enough, a lot of the things that we ended up doing were not even on that tree, right? And so yeah, this decision paralysis was a bit frustrating. And we're trying to think hard and carefully about how do we best spend our time? What is the most valuable thing to do, right? And in the end, what worked beautifully was just, hey, let's stop thinking. Let's start doing some of the things that feel awesome, intuitive, and natural to us. And so Victor just started fixing various different errors. And as we were going through this process of just cleaning things up, things got a lot clearer, right? But yeah, that certainly for me as well was the toughest part of this project. I guess speaking about hard things, last week we had an incident also, which kind of related to this feature. How about that? I guess this was maybe one of the tough moments as well of this project.
Yeah, so I want everyone listening to picture this, I'm a front-end engineer, Bogdan is also a front-end engineer, right? So we were both front-end engineers working on this, the front-end parts, the charts and the, styling things. Yeah, easy there, we're front-end engineers, we can do that. But then we had a lot of challenges, and this project required a lot of back-end work as well. And not just adding a new GraphQL field or API or things like that, but actually getting deep into the metrics. We store a lot of data in a ClickHouse database, and we actually get a lot of traffic nowadays. It's I think at the moment monthly we're getting 30 billion requests or something, so a lot of traffic daily. So when we are calculating metrics or analytics for a dashboard, it's a lot of data that we're handling. So, these queries have to be fast and we have to optimize those queries. So yeah, during the project, I think both Bogdan and me, we learned a lot about our backend stuff and, getting our hands deep into there and actually computing and trying to come up with these queries. Well, I don't know how you feel, Bogdan, but yeah, I feel now I know a lot of stuff about SQL that maybe I didn't want to know, but now I know, But yeah, we had this incident past week about performance, and it was scary because essentially one of the queries we used to calculate one of the new metrics is quite expensive, and our ClickHouse database started slowing down a lot, and a lot of our responses were failing. This incident only lasted for 20 minutes or 15 minutes. It was short, thankfully. But yeah, as soon as that started happening, we started looking into how we can optimize these queries. And that was another learning experience, sitting down, seeing how to optimize this, making a plan, and then executing on that to make sure, that doesn't happen again. Yeah. I'm curious, Bogdan, how do you also feel about the backend stuff we had to do? It felt scary to me, to be honest. Redefining and doing these metrics when with barely SQL knowledge at the beginning, it felt really scary.
Yeah. I mean, as a front-end engineer, I have to be scared of SQL queries, right? So
yeah, of course.
Yeah, trying to understand ClickHouse and all the concepts that go beyond SQL, it was a big endeavor. It was also a fun one, pairing and trying to come up with the SQL stuff for those metrics. But like you said, I mean, of course, things could be optimized even further, and I'm sure we're gonna perfect the queries in the future, and hopefully we won't have any performance issues. ClickHouse.
Yeah, we had already done some performance improvements. I recall, Victor, you had already done some iterations after we had released the first public offering. But I guess we were a victim of our own success, right? People were using it and that was causing issues. But I think also in that particular instance, right, we had like a doubling of our traffic.
Yeah.
Like irrespective of these other queries that were more expensive, there was a doubling of traffic. And so that plus these more expensive queries that we hadn't yet optimized kind of caused these issues. But yeah, it's scary, right? It's always scary making changes to production, but I think we did quite well. So congratulations to everyone involved.
I would just add that it sure didn't feel like working with two front-end engineers. It felt like working with like really back-end engineers, to be honest, like 2-in-1, at least from my side. You don't normally see front-end engineers playing with SQL and trying to figure out how to make a calculation so complex as max cache hit rate. So yeah, kudos for that, definitely.
Yeah, and Camille's not kidding here. Like our definition for the cache hit rate, maximum cache hit rate SQL query is like a really long query. It's like like 300, 200 characters easily. It's like a really, really long and complicated query to get the right number. Yeah, and coming up with that was like a lot of pairing between Bogdan and me, and just sitting down, testing these, going back to the math. Like we have like a lot of TL draw whiteboards floating around with a lot of math. And actually one of our engineers, Thomas, he has a math degree. So every time we were doing one of these formulas, we were like, hey, Thomas, can you double check our math? Because we actually wanted to get sure we were getting our math right. Because something we also learned early is that getting the math wrong is costly. Because at the beginning, one of our formulas was wrong and one of our customers was like, hey, this data seems labeled wrong. Then we noticed that and we're like, oh crap, yeah, this formula is not the right one. And it's hard to notice that at times because you're working out the formula, it makes sense in your head. You code the formula in SQL or something, you set it live and, data is flowing through and you don't notice because maybe in some services you don't have enough data. But then when you go to a service that has 10 or 20 million requests a day, then, the data gets into perspective and then the numbers don't add up. So yeah, it's tricky to get the math right for these metrics.
Yeah, that kind of touches on, we also redefined what it means to have a cache hit rate. What is the definition of a cache hit rate? That is a side quest we can go on very shortly. But before we do that, I think one of the things that stood out to me as well is not only do we do a lot of math, but we also had Figma presentations of our math. Like Camille would do these designs where you would show the equations and you would show what that would look like in the dashboard, right? So you can kind of try to understand, okay, if we make this change, what does that look like? And with actual numbers, with an actual dashboard. And yeah, it was just very polished. And I just thought it was amazing to see because math in my head is normally something you write down on a piece of paper and throw away, right? And so it's really fun.
And a fun fact, those beautiful design formulas in Figma, those were the source of truth at the end for me. At least I was going back there, looking at the formula and then validating that with the SQL version.
Nice. But yeah, I mean, as I said, we kind of redefined what a cache hit rate means, right, during this project. How did that come about? I mean, that's such a central question to kind of revisit for a project like this.
This came at a point where we realized our maximum cache hit rate and the cache hit rate metrics, both of these were not adding up. Because we started noticing that in some scenarios, the max cache hit rate was lower than the cache hit rate. And that doesn't make sense, right? Like how is the maximum lower than the actual cache hit rate value? And so when we revisited the formulas, we noticed they were operating in different data sets. So we were like, oh, okay, this is, it makes sense. If these percentages are operating in different data sets, they are never going to add up. It doesn't make sense to compare these two numbers that are operating in different sets of data. So we had to sit down and refine those metrics to operate on a similar data set. And, coming up with this was like a lot of work and a lot of product and design work. I don't know if you remember, Alex, but we had like a lot of conversations and we were like on the verge of like, do we go with this definition? Do we go with this one? At that point, to be honest, I was glad Alex joined the product because like he brought like a lot of product insights, a lot of product knowledge to like help make this decision. And I remember being in the room and telling Alex and Camille, like, I don't know the product lead, but I don't feel comfortable making this decision. Because, we're like redefining the cache hit rate. It felt like wrong at some point to do that because it's like, this metric has been like that for a while. And if you look at the industry definition for this metric, is this one that it is the one that we are using. And now it's like, it felt like a huge change that could go wrong. But yeah, it didn't end up going wrong at the end. But yeah, it felt really scary. Alex, I don't know if you remember those conversations we had about actually choosing the right definition for cache hit rate.
With the cache hit rate, it was quite interesting. And it was roughly like when I joined the project. And I think the question, right, was like there's a definition out there what other services use for cache hit rate. There's like our definition that we had, and we needed to like figure out like what is the intent behind this. Like how do we want the user, a customer, to use the cache hit rate in conjunction with the maximum cache hit rate? Like, what should they be able to tell, infer from that? And what would then be the best calculation to help them understand, in that case, concretely, help them understand, what is the current state of the cache coverage with the cache hit rate? How much room do they have for improvement? And the cache hit rate defined the current state, right? And then the maximum was the ceiling that could be reached. And we need to figure out a way to most accurately represent it, so that they can also then tell which of the operations would have the biggest impact if we improved it. One thing I found actually quite interesting is, just figuring out that what does it mean for us? In the end, we included the hits, and then we divided that by all the hits, all the misses, and all the cache build passes, and figuring out should we include the cache build passes in that? Or should we go with some other industry definitions that we have seen? And making that decision would also mean for us, we switched from the hits divided by hits and misses to the one that has the higher, the bigger data set, meaning that for a lot of our customers, the cache hit rate dropped for some from 80% to 20%. And so there was this big impact to the customer, and we need to figure, as part of making the decision, we need to be okay with that, of course. And we are okay with that because it's more accurately representing the state and what they can do and how much room they have for improvement. But it also meant that we need to figure out how do we communicate with the customers? How do we engage with them early enough so that they're not surprised by that or think something went wrong with our setup that is causing this to drop? So we spent quite some time on figuring out what is the right way to communicate that. How can we annotate this within the UI interface that this is now changing, to be as transparent up front with our customers as possible here.
Yeah, I think those drops were quite significant. There are customers services that had 50% cache hit rate dropping down to 20 or 30%, right? Simply because we're defining it slightly differently. So that could feel very scary. It's definitely worth considering how to make that feel less scary, understandable, not a disappointment.
Yeah, and the most important thing here, right, was that the customer they won't believe or think that it was something that they did wrong, like a schema change that caused the drop, or a configuration change that suddenly caused the drop. And that we wanted to be very transparent about that and upfront.
Now that you talked about schema changes and config changes, Bogdan recently released the kind of last iteration, which are these vertical markers on all the graphs. Bogdan, do you want to tell us about that?
Yes. So in the previously discussed caching page on the chart where you see the cache hit rate over time, we pinpoint with some markers when there has been a config change, so that looking at the chart, you can easily trace if something in your config update impacted in a good way or in a bad way your cache hit rate. Yeah, now it's more easy to track. I mean, we already had that data in the overview page in the service history, but it was much harder to pinpoint a config change with a change in the cache hit rate.
Yeah, I think it's one of those cool features that makes it feel like a cohesive product. You know, it's that extra mile where it's suddenly it feels oh, you're surfacing insight. You know, you're not just showing me data, you're also helping me understand the data, right? So I think it's a really nice addition.
Yeah, one thing that we haven't talked about so far is the second milestone, the work that we did on bringing the clarity to how cache rules that are set in your config are actually affecting your operations and request. We went into two directions here. We actually clarify exactly how a particular request was cached, going quite deep into understanding how multiple rules are conveying to cache the request. Yeah, the best person to continue with it is to explain how we actually managed to overlay the cache rules configuration onto the operations, probably Victor, so you can maybe bring us closer to how we managed to accomplish that.
Yeah, sure. So at some point, we wanted to surface this because customers were giving us feedback that, they changed their configuration and now they go to the dashboard and they see the analytics and they see oh, this was a hit, this was a miss, this was a pass. But they didn't have a direct connection from that caching reason, that caching status to a reason, oh, this is a hit, but why is this request a hit? They had to manually go and look at, oh, this is the query that we're getting, so I have a caching rule for this type, and that's the reason why it's a hit. So they had to do all of this manually, and that's a lot of cognitive overhead, right? Being aware of that, and debugging your cache was a little bit hard, I would say. So we noticed it, we went to the drawing board, we're ideating on how to surface caching rules, Camille did a lot of iteration in the designs to make sure we were showing this in the best possible way, because essentially, as he said, when multiple rules are applying to a request, that's complicated. Like, how do we show that? How do we show what's the rule that's actually applying the max age, that's applying the scopes that are applying? There's a lot of complexity in showing that in a meaningful way and in a simple way that's easy to understand. So I would say kudos to Camille for actually coming up with an amazing design there. And on the implementation side, it's like we had to like sit down and actually see how do we store these caching rules. Now that we're storing like, billions of requests every month, how do we relate one of those requests to a caching rule? So we considered multiple approaches. At the end, we were able to compute this on the fly without storing any new data, which was amazing. That was like the most simple solution we came up with. And then it was about rendering those rules in the UI, and yeah, it was a fun one. And essentially what we are enabling for a product perspective is that now as a user, when you're looking at a request, you can figure out easily like, oh, this request wasn't cached because I have a rule that says the max age to 0, which means that it won't be ever cached. So you can actually figure out things really quickly and adjust your config accordingly and iterate.
Yeah. Like I remember when I joined the project, it was, I think, just right before Milestone 2. And I was like, okay, in order to participate here effectively, I need to figure out like what's the state and what is the problem, what is difficult to do. And I was like, I will go in now into Stellate and try to figure out how I might be able to improve the cache hit rate of one of our services. Yeah, so like my goal was to figure out like how to actually like improve a cache hit rate of a service. And so that I can figure out like what are our customers going through it, and I can give guidance and input into the project. And it was just right before Milestone 2 shipped. So like I went in on the service, on the operations, on the requests, and like, this operation I would like to improve. I clicked on it. I clicked on the request and stuck. Like I could not figure out like what I'm supposed to do here. What do I learn? What information should I consume to figure out like how to change the rules, right? And then once Milestone 2 shipped, it was day and night. Suddenly I could see like, okay, here's one rule that is overriding, like a more generic rule is overriding my specific rule that I created, and with a short invalidation settings. Or there was one rule and one operation that was like set to max age 0. And like immediately after Milestone 2 shipped, you could tell, even though like quite new into the project, of like, here is actually what you can do as a user to optimize your cache hit rate. And it was such a drastic difference in like before and after. It was beautiful to see. Kudos to the team on like figuring that out.
Yeah, it's very nice. I remember your excited Slack messages. And I guess it's also a case of, it's very difficult when you work on a product every single day to have empathy for what it's like to look at it the first time, right? But that's essentially what our new customers are doing, right? They come to our website, they sign up, and then they're like, all right, I need to suddenly understand what this thing does. That's a really hard challenge, right? And especially for us, because we look at it all day, how to remember what that's like, right? That's really hard. And so sometimes it's helpful, you came in as a new product manager and you had those fresh eyes, right? And so it's really cool to see you be excited about the second milestone. Yeah, great catch, Camille. Thank you for that. Yeah, this project has truly been very impactful. It's been really cool to see through customers getting to us and saying it's awesome, or Alex being dumbfounded by how awesome Milestone 2 is. There's been so many cool points along the way of shipping something and seeing customers be excited about it. And so it was wonderful to go through all the memories and have a bit of a story session with you guys. I very much appreciated it. I hope you guys appreciated it. And hopefully the listeners also appreciated it. Yeah, but I think that's a wrap. I think we've covered most of the topics. There's nothing outstanding. And so thank you very much for the conversation. Thank you for spending the time with me. And I look forward to seeing you at work tomorrow. Bye, guys.